Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
This episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast, part one of our conversation with Jimmy Spencer from the UnInterrupted, is brought to you by Compassion International. Go to compassion.com/sports spectrum. And for $38, you can make a difference in a child's life by sponsoring them and releasing them from poverty. We're so excited to be partnering with Compassion. It's been about 6 months now since we've gotten to work with them, and they've been a sponsor on this podcast, and just so grateful for the work that they're doing. I mean, we're talking about releasing children from poverty. I mean, this is what every child deserves, right? The chance to have hope, the chance to have food and educational training, tutoring, mentoring, vocational training, getting them ready for life, getting them the basic needs and supplies that they all deserve. And Compassion does such a great job with this, and the whole thing is surrounded with the idea of who Jesus is and the opportunity to know Jesus and to do this work for the kingdom. Compassion does it right. $38 a month. Go to compassion.com/sports spectrum and sponsor a child today. Today's guest on the podcast is part one of a two-part conversation with Jimmy Spencer. Now, he's the head of athlete relations and content for the UnInterrupted. The UnInterrupted has been around for a few years now, about 3 years, and was founded by, yes, LeBron James, along with his CEO and his partner, Maverick Carter. And Jimmy was one of the first employees hired by the UnInterrupted back in November of 2015. Jimmy's faith in Jesus is strong. He's going to share a story in part two of this podcast episode on how he came to know Christ, and it's just powerful. It's unlike most stories that I've heard of as far as a testimony goes in Jesus. So that's in part two. But part one, we're going to dive deep into his job, what that job entails, how he came to work at the UnInterrupted, how LeBron and him have worked together. What's it like to have LeBron as a boss? How involved is LeBron in the creative process and the work that Jimmy does? And then Jimmy's also going to share a fun story of how he's seen maybe one of his favorite stories on how he has seen LeBron in his job and how LeBron and him have kind of interacted together. So part one is more about Jimmy's job with the UnInterrupted, and then part two will be the powerful story of his faith in Jesus. So take a listen to our friend Jimmy Spencer. This is part one of a two-part podcast. Jimmy, the head of athlete relations and content for the UnInterrupted. I think you guys will enjoy hearing his journey, his heart, and his story. This is Jimmy Spencer on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Welcome, Jimmy, to the show.
Thank you so much. I love what you're doing with this podcast, and I'm thankful that you had me join.
Jimmy, it's good to talk to you. I'm excited to talk and kind of go into matters of faith, hear your journey, and maybe just kind of carry conversations on different aspects of faith in sports. But I love your job. I just think the head of athlete relations and content for the UnInterrupted. The UnInterrupted, of course, founded by Maverick Carter and LeBron James. Explain to all of us, I guess, first of all, what your job is, what you currently do right now with the UnInterrupted.
Yeah, it's funny. It's kind of a dream job. I just spoke to hundreds of high school students, came to UCLA. I'm based out of here in Los Angeles. And I kind of explained my journey as a sports writer and moving over to UnInterrupted. And I truly realized, I'm like, I have a dream job. Like if I were to tell this to 15-year-old Jimmy, he would freak out. Absolutely. And so sometimes I have to remember, and it's not even just working around professional athletes. I think this is the beauty of your job too, which is you get to know people at a different level, and you get to just have conversations and relationships. And I think that's the best part of my job. But really, what I do is at the foundation of UnInterrupted is athlete storytelling, and I think that's where we, pivoted away from what the traditional media has always done, which is what I did for many years, which is I'm going to interview somebody and then I'm going to decide what the story is. And I think at UnInterrupted, we've done a really good job of saying to the athlete, like, what's the story you want to tell and how do you want to tell it? And of course, everything we do is video or audio. We don't do written stuff. But it's what's the vision? What's the creative? Letting them have feedbacks. I mean, we have athletes who direct their own pieces, and we don't just say that. They actually do it. They sit and they look at cuts and they review stuff and they go, oh, this looks cool. Oh, can we do a little bit more here? Can we do this? Can we tell this part of the story? And it's not just some puff piece, PR piece either. It's truly an opportunity for us to let the athlete tell a very compelling story, but partner with them in a really real way to make it authentic and compelling. Because at the end of the day, I always say to every athlete that we work with, you go home and you decide, am I going to turn on Netflix? Am I going to turn on HBO? Where am I going to consume my content and how? And everyone's fighting for those eyeballs, those ears. And in this media business, it's so crazy. So it's just kind of hitting the reset button and say, what's the way to tell this story in a compelling way and do it really authentically? And we don't try and work with every athlete either. There's a certain athlete that I think wants to be involved in that process, wants to do it. And so my job at UnInterrupted, and I was one of the first at UnInterrupted. I was actually the first employee here at the very beginning of it. And like I said, I was a sports writer who my passion was storytelling and feature writing, and I had done that for years. And coming here, it was, how do I now translate and transfer over? And I became the guy that knew all the athletes, which is how I became the athlete relations guy. Yep. And now, so, I help take part in all the content that athletes do and hold their hand through every project and really make sure it's turning out and advocating for the athlete to have the story told the way they want it told. But for me, the way the process works here is luckily now that the brand has grown over the last 3 years and so many athletes know about us, a lot of them come to us and say, hey, I have this story. I want to tell this. In fact, I had a guy, an NFL player, come in just a couple days ago, and I tell you, Jason, like, my heart has never been more like torn up about sports and what it can do to athletes. This is a guy that is suffering right now from the head injury stuff. Like, he's really like emotionally and mental health is not there. Yeah. Here's a guy who went broke. And this was a former Pro Bowler, and he went broke. He has nothing, and he can't even get a hold of people at the NFL to help him out. Those are the kind of stories that I'm like, these aren't being told on major platforms right now. Yeah. And I don't know exactly why, but I have an idea why. And UnInterrupted can be the place where the athlete can come tell the story the way they want to tell it. And it's, again, we're not going to it's not going to be one-sided. We're going to listen and hear and make sure we're telling the story properly and correctly. But my job is really to take an athlete in, hear their story, ask questions. It doesn't have to be heavy stuff. There's many athletes. We had an athlete in here. She's, huge into the storytelling around food and how food brings out storytelling around the table, and used a story about her grandmother. And so I've been in a lucky spot to be able to hear those cool things, have those conversations, and then go to our production team. Like, how do we put this together? What do we do? And does this live somewhere like Facebook? Does this live on Netflix? Does it live on HBO? Or is this a branded content opportunity? And so there's this kind of melding of media in this, the business side and the athlete. And my job is really to put all those pieces together. That's
really cool. And I think, I remember when I was at ESPN, one of my jobs, I was a talent producer, sort of talent relations, athlete relations. I was the guy that built the relationships with the athletes as well. One of the guys and gals at ESPN. And I remember originally I had to kind of prove myself because nobody knew, when I was calling, even though I had the 4 letters, I had ESPN to use as, hey, I work with ESPN. Will this person come on? There was a time when I would just call and they because they knew me or we had a relationship, it was a easier get, if you will, easier booking. I wonder for you, in the beginning, you obviously have the name LeBron James attached to that. It's maybe not what you're first mentioning, but of course that's going to be in there. Are you reaching out originally, and now you just mentioned that athletes are coming to you? Are you finding more of you reaching out and saying, hey, we want to do a story because we really think you have a unique story to tell? Or is it more of all these people are coming to you and then you have to kind of discern which ones you say yes to and sometimes which ones you have to say no to?
Yeah, there's certainly a mixture of things for us. Especially at the beginning, we were going out. No one had heard of us because we weren't anything. And I always say it's the Maverick Carter or LeBron James cheat code. Like, at the end of the day, it's much easier for me to make a call and have a meeting with an athlete because of them being part of this company and this business. And I think I've been lucky to have Maverick as a mentor in terms of how to build relationships and how to really understand people and how to do things. He's been great with that. And so is LeBron. And you can see kind of that come to fruition in a lot of different areas in both their lives and businesses. now it's a combination. Every athlete has a friend on a team who he's like, hey, you should talk to Jimmy over at Uninterrupted, or every athlete has a manager or a rep or an agent. And a lot of times they're reaching out saying, hey, we'd love to get involved, whether it's on the business side of it or it's just on the storytelling side.
Yeah.
So my job definitely is I have to be discerning when it comes to what is the right story for Uninterrupted and what's the right story for the athlete too, and how do we make sure there's the other side is we don't have unlimited funds to just create everything.
Right.
So we need to be thoughtful about which stories make sense for what Uninterrupted is about. And really kind of our theme at Uninterrupted is I am more than an athlete, and kind of what's the story outside of just the way ESPN would tell it, the way Fox Sports would tell it, and really kind of doing it from our own vantage point. And so, yeah, it's definitely, it's getting easier now to have the conversation because the more examples that are out there, more people understand the unique way that we do it. And I think that helps a lot. But it's also, I don't look at athletes and say, hey, you're a tier 1 athlete, so we're going to work with you. Or you're a tier 2 athlete, so we're not going to work with you, or tier 3 or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't do that with athletes because at the end of the day, and maybe this sounds a little cheesy and I don't mean it to, but like, everyone is a person and everyone has a story to tell. And for us, it's more about the story than it is about anything else. And if it's a great story that empowers an athlete, I want to tell that story and I want to do it the best way we can, whether that's a 60-minute documentary or it's a 60-second Instagram clip. We want to be able to tell that story.
So it's not far-fetched to say LeBron is, in essence, your boss, right?
Yeah, no, he for sure is. I mean, anybody you send emails to or anyone that you have an understanding that you have to answer to, I would say, Maverick Carter's obviously, he's my direct boss. He's the CEO of the company. Yep. But LeBron co-founded it with him and is very much, involved and interested. And, I can recall times of him jumping on a speakerphone and asking for, updates about how things were going. And just the other day, I met with Skylar Diggins-Smith, who's WNBA star, obviously. Yep. Had a great conversation, with her about potential projects here at Uninterrupted. And it was fantastic. And later that day, I saw LeBron, and we had a photo shoot off location. And I was telling him that I met with Skylar, and he couldn't be more interested in wanting to know what her story is, what she wants to tell, wanting to have her on a guest for a future show that he does. So he's very much intimately involved and passionate about Uninterrupted.
That's awesome. Is there a story, a LeBron story that you can share? On any level, I guess, in working with him, you said you got the job 3 years ago, and you were one of the first employees. So maybe that was the story or something. So how did you guys get connected? And maybe a story that you can share about LeBron.
Yeah. I mean, we connected actually, it's funny. It's like goes back to relationships and making sure you have good, positive relationships. I mean, I was a sports writer during a very tumultuous time when sports writing was, it felt like you were getting kicked around from spot to spot. And I was definitely in that boat. And I was, most recently before Uninterrupted, I was at a tech startup in San Francisco, kind of honestly a little bit lost, a little bit feeling I had done the journey through different outlets. And I got a national NBA writer job, left, got a contract there. And literally 2 weeks after I returned from my honeymoon, I got fired. And it was kind of out of the blue. I didn't understand why, but I began to doubt everything that I had as a journalist, as a writer. Like, am I even good at this? Should I be doing this? Yeah. Scrambling because I'm newly married and now I'm the unemployed husband at home, and feeling this kind of almost like directionless. Like, where am I going to go now? Am I going to take a state job? What am I going to do? Because I had put so much purpose in my career and my job. And so when I came out of that, I ended up at a tech startup, which honestly was not the spot for me. It was not where my passion was. It wasn't, I wasn't doing my best work. I was somewhat toiling, I think. And I always stayed in the mix as a writer in some form, though. And I started, and actually, it's funny. There's this guy, Adi Joseph, and I don't know if you know him, but he's an editor. He's been in a lot of different spots himself, but he's a great editor in the sports side. And he gave me an assignment to go out and cover the Warriors during their playoff run into the finals. And it was great, and like the money was whatever, but the opportunity to stay in the mix and write. And it's funny how just one person giving you a little bit of confidence, what that can do for you. And he gave me that little bit of confidence. And he's one point I wrote a story on Klay Thompson and Steph Curry, and he sent me a note. He's like, that was the best story out of the finals game one. Like, that was the best one. And it got me this new confidence. And I started I almost found myself again, and found this writing love and passion. And so I covered that finals. And in doing so, I ended up doing an interview with Steph Curry and sat with him and asked him the question, do you want to come back to the Warriors when you're a free agent? And for the first time, he went on record by saying, yes, I want to come back to the Warriors. This was a year before he actually was going to sign the contract. But, it made the ESPN bottom line, which is, every reporter's wants to break news, wants to be out there.
Yeah.
And I tell that story because it ended up days later, I would end up interviewing for this role here with just a number of candidates. I had a mutual friend who knew people in the, that Maverick knew. So I interviewed just like anybody else. I showed up, I had a tie. It was not a tie situation, but I had a tie on. And I showed up and I had a confidence because of what I had been doing the last couple of weeks. And I had a great example of me relating to an athlete and having a great conversation with the Steph Curry piece. And I think ultimately that opened up the door to come back and do this at UnInterrupted. And it's been phenomenal. And I've had this opportunity. So that's how I got here. And in terms of of course, LeBron James, everything that these guys have been doing has been successful.
Yeah.
And the opportunity was seemed like, this is a no-brainer. I need to make this work and make this happen. In fact, I moved my family at the time when my son was just 3 weeks old from San Francisco to Los Angeles for it, which was we uprooted our lives. We had, a church. We led a Bible study up in San Francisco. I had, great community, family, all that. We left all that for this job. And really did it on faith. But through this time, whether it was, like I said, the CEO, Maverick Carter, or it was LeBron James, the founder, these guys have just instilled confidence. They've been men of their word. They've done great work. And I think the story that really rings true of that, where it really clicked, was around NBA All-Star Weekend here in Los Angeles back in February of this year. And that's when we had done an ad, or actually, I guess it wasn't an ad. It was a content partnership show with Uber, where LeBron James and Kevin Durant were in the back of an Uber with Kerry Champion.
Of course. Yep.
LeBron and Kevin shared words against Trump, which led to a Fox News anchor coming out and saying, "Shut up and dribble."
Yep.
And right around that same time, we were ready to roll out "I am more than an athlete," which is our slogan at UnInterrupted. It's what we're about. We have it in neon letters in front of me right now. I'm looking out of this office in the glass. I am more than an athlete. And everyone, the athletes that I speak to daily, texting me, calling, reaching out, sending me DMs, saying thank you to LeBron for standing up. And it wasn't even that it was standing up to Trump or standing up in a political way necessarily, although some of it was, but most of it was just thanks for making sure that we have a voice, because for so long we've been treated almost like meat, right? You're just a commodity in this game and you're going to be tossed out. But now suddenly there is this voice that, and it's not just I am more than an athlete. It's not a talent show thing. It's I am more than an athlete. The guy I talked about who's been suffering post NFL career, he's a person, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Some athletes are fathers, some are mothers, daughters, male, female. I am more means so much. And I got all that feedback, and to just kind of share how genuine LeBron is about stuff, I sent him an email and I said, hey, I just want you to know how meaningful what you've been doing and standing for has been for fellow athletes in all sports, different gender. Everybody's really resonating. That means a lot. And he sent a note. He's I can't tell you how much this means, and hope to see you out there today. This was during the NBA All-Star festivities. I saw him after he won MVP, actually, which is fitting that he ended up going to the Lakers, but he won MVP there at Staples during the All-Star game. And I saw him in the press conference, and he gave a hug, and he just, he said thank you. And I think there's a real, like, people forget about this, even with the biggest sports star in the world, whether that's LeBron or whomever that might be.
Yeah.
There's this thing that people forget, which is at the end of the day, they're people taking chances too and saying things not always going to be right. Sometimes they are going to be right. But what we're trying to do at UnInterrupted, which is empower athletes, that's our number one mission. He's doing that for other athletes, but he's also being empowered by other athletes. And he's being empowered by this platform UnInterrupted now that, yes, he created, but now is a machine working, underneath him. And I think that's a cool, just to me, like an anecdote about how much he does care, but also how meaningful it is.
And that's Jimmy Spencer, head of athlete relations and content for the UnInterrupted here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. That was part one of our conversation. Tomorrow we'll be releasing part two. And this is where I think the story takes a little pivot into his faith. And it's just, wow. I mean, Jimmy's going to share in part two a very long but very powerful and very impactful story of how he came to faith in Jesus Christ. It's going to be quite the impactful story and conversation. I think you guys will really like it. So that's tomorrow on part two of our conversation with Jimmy Spencer, head of athlete relations and content for the UnInterrupted. Make sure you come back tomorrow and download that episode of the podcast. And want to say a quick thank you to our friends with Compassion International. Go to compassion.com/sportspectrum, $38 a month. Sponsor a child in Jesus' name. 1.8 million children so far have been a part of Compassion International. Over 150,000 children coming to know Jesus Christ through the great work being done over at Compassion International. Sponsor a child for $38 a month. Go to compassion.com/sportspectrum. Make a difference in a child's life. Promise you, you won't regret it. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you tomorrow for part two of our conversation with Jimmy Spencer right here on the Sports Spectrum podcast.